The Seer, Violets in the Grass, by Jessica Ariel Morocco. Chapter 9. The Money Pit. In May 2012, I was watching a television program about the ancient mysteries of extraterrestrials. I know I'd watched this program before, and I ended up watching the last 30 minutes of the segment over and over again. Something about the story bothered me. I knew that something needed to become unveiled. I knew that they were speaking to me to pay attention. Each time I listened to it, I kept wondering how I missed some really important information previously mentioned in the program. After a while, it began to click together for me. Then it happened. An ancient tablet was shown with carved triangles, domino-like dots, and zeros with a line through them like a symbol, used in math to reflect a value less than 0. I stared at it for a moment. Some of the symbols looked familiar to me, but not in a good way. I rewound the program and began to listen again. This was a place that they referred to as the Money Pit. It was located at a place called Oak Island in Nova Scotia. There have been strange speculations about this since it was discovered by a few men who saw unexplained lights on the island and were somehow directed to stumble upon this pit. With a strong hint or lure, they began digging and found this strange tablet by one of the many layers of wood and flagstone that had led to a depth of over 30 feet. They were unstable to reach to the bottom because it went much too deep beyond the 30 feet of layering that they could see. Apparently, this location had been a quest for many treasure hunters and notable people, such as Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In their attempt to dig, many people have died in the process. They even tried to construct tunnels to give them access from the sides and discovered that it was a complex hydraulic system that flooded every time they attempted to advance forward by locating the bottom of the pit. Some considered that the Scots may have buried and hid some of the British crown jewels there. My thoughts were that it would be next to impossible, without heavy equipment, to retrieve those jewels if they went to that much trouble to seal it. Some had even speculated that the Ark of the Covenant from the Old Testament and the power that was attached to that may explain why they had also found marks that reveal exposure to radiation that scientists had discovered. This sounds like a possibility and could be a logical assessment that something of value was hidden there. So what was the big deal? I still couldn't help but feel troubled by all of this information. My sense of mediumship began to stir, and I felt there was something wrong. The tablet did not have the feeling of lost treasure, but rather a proclamation of death and punishment. I went into meditation, and there it was. I saw the dead. It was the ancient dead before recorded time and not completely human, or as we are today. The island seemed uninhabited and beautiful. It all began to make sense. This was a punishment and a prison for rebels. This was a place for the undead. This was not the Money Pit, but the pit of hell we had always read about. It all sounds morbid. Why the extensive system of layers of wood and rock? Why are there hydraulics set up to flood if one attempts to enter? It is a perfect system created to keep prisoners locked in without being guarded or watched. These were some of the slave workers of the Anunnaki, or other very early beings who rebelled a system that they refused to belong to. They wanted to take over the power of something that they didn't belong to them. Their hearts were so angry that I could feel the venom of their souls. They were trapped in this space etherically. The extraterrestrial lights were a reminder that some were not of a human origin. I cannot prove this theory. However, I'm confident that the Ark of the Covenant exists somewhere on the planet. There are probably other locations where incredible jewels and items of value are hidden. In my impression of this location, there is nothing to be found of value but rather of death in that hole. And I hope that we, as human explorers, will not venture down a pit that has that type of hell hidden within it. The Ark of the Covenant may be a Pandora's box, but this is worse than illness or disease or other plague that could come. This may be unleashing of an evil on the earth that we cannot imagine. Let the places of darkness stay dormant, and let the gods deal directly with it. This is the ashes of another world's remains contained in a well of a sinking pit, and we would be wise to search for the gold within our hearts, and not the magical lure of greed and spaces of the unknown. Too many of our men have died in conquests of a similar nature and found not only an early grave, but may have found their souls trapped in those very places of darkness. Alright, so here is a website that I found from, this is not the original show that I watched when I said that I watched a show about Oak Island. So my book was published, copywritten in 2011, Macabre Short Stories and Poems from the Other Side, and this is where, I started getting all this information. But the book, The Seer, that was published in 2012. And so here is Oak Island TV show was aired in 2014. So I watched another show about Oak Island. They had their ideas, and I understood there have been many that have had theories ranging from, pirates, the Freemasons, royal families, Vikings, and much more. So, we have a lot of legend, that leads to the idea that there's something hidden here. Even the Templars, that they had hidden something here of great value, and by the construction of this pit, they call it the money pit, for a reason. And I guess it's also very, the legend and the bad luck that also goes along with those that are treasure seekers, in which I really said, people should be careful what they do and stay away from certain things, because it's almost like a snare or a trap. In this story, you have this curse that's on there, and there's the many theories that they have, and we can leave the links that involve this Marie Antoinette's jewels and all that, and pirate treasure. So I'm going to come back here, and the reason why I'm going to show this to you, because I know that I was even surprised, because I hadn't looked at this before. I watched their show, but I didn't look at their site. And so I started reading. If someone were to claim that they knew a story that involved the Holy Grail, a band of pirates, William Shakespeare, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Edgar Allan Poe. And so I tell everyone, a lot of these writings were influenced by Edgar Allan Poe that I have. My book, The Seer, Violets in the Grass, and my book, Macabre Short Stories and Poems from the Other Side. And the Short Stories and Poems from the Other Side is the first book that I wrote with a lot of different, I call them riddles and stories. And at some point, one of my chapters in the book, The Seer, I talk about the riddlers, those that are presenting, it's kind of like a cipher, deciphering things and trying to figure things out. So here you see, they even mention Edgar Allan Poe. They mention pirates. I mentioned the story of Prescott's Waiting in the book The Seer, and it's about pirates from the 1600s. So I'm looking at this and I start scrolling down and I see that this whole thing is in Nova Scotia, right? And just pretty much tells all a story about how all of these where it's located at, the discovery, and how it was bad luck because people that began looking for the information here. There's the pirates right there. They began looking for the information here, and they ended up. I guess that there was some kind of story that they were expecting. That these people, certain amount of people, were supposed to die before they'd be able to find the treasure. And I talk about the doubloons, the gold doubloons that were found by the pirates, which was a really, really interesting parallel to what I was seeing. And, he goes in, you can probably read all of this in depth. When they get here, here's this really weird looking stone, which, could be ET language or, but, they come to another conclusion. But I will say that extraterrestrials do use symbols as opposed to the letters and numbers that we're accustomed to. So here, for decades, the encoded message on the face of the rock was thought to be indecipherable. During this time, it was rumored that Smith used it as a fireback in his fireplace, while others claim it was used as a doorstep to Halifax's bookbinder shop, or possibly even displayed in the window as an enticement to potential expedition financiers. It was not until 1860s that an academy was able to examine the symbols and provide a credible translation, although this fact, like many involving Oak Island, remains disputed. Many believe that Dalhousie University professor of languages James Leachy successfully decoded this tablet's inscription, borrowing a page from Edgar Allan Poe's The Bug. Leachy employed a technique termed a simple substitution cipher, whereby unique symbols correlate to specific letters in a given alphabet. For example, 3 vertical lines similar to this might substitute the letter E. Once a rational scheme is set for the symbols presented on the code, a context for each letter can be constructed and meaning is extracted from the text. Applying this approach to cryptography, Leachy resolved a stone from the money pit read, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. So I wasn't sure what they were talking about, and so I had to go over to where is it? The gold bug. So this is a story. And I know that some people probably don't like I'm using Wikipedia, but it's easy, it's fast, and something like this, they're not going to fabricate, This is just a reference to another book. But The Gold Bug is a short story by Edgar Allan Poe published in 1843. The plot follows William Legrand, who was bitten by a gold-colored bug. His servant, Jupiter, fears that Legrand is going insane and goes to Legrand's friend, an unnamed narrator, who agrees to visit his old friend. Legrand pulls the other two into an adventure after deciphering a secret message that will lead to a buried treasure. The story is set on Sullivan's Island in South Carolina. So it's not here in Nova Scotia, but so I'm just going to continue reading. Is often compared with Poe's tale of ratiocination as an early form of detective fiction. Poe became aware of public's interest in secret writings in 1840 and asked readers to challenge his skills as a code breaker. He took advantage of the popularity of cryptography. as he was writing The Gold Bug and the success of the story centers on each such cryptogram. Modern critics have judged the characterization of Legrand's servant Jupiter as racist, especially because of his comical dialect speech. Poe submitted The Gold Bug as an entry to a writing contest sponsored by the Philadelphia Dollar newspaper. His story won the grand prize and was published in 3 installments beginning in June 1843. And then it goes on about, how he got $100 probably. The Gold Bug was an instant winner, popular, and so forth. But he created these It also helped popularize, I don't think he created, but he popularized the cryptograms. So this is what it looked like, and this is what helped them to break the code. So who would put Edgar Allan Poe together with Oak Island? And they did the research. I just heard him talking, and there it is. There's the code with all these unusual symbols. And then it goes on to tell this story about how they end up going in there to how to find this thing. I guess, how to decode and then go searching for the gold. And so I believe it's here that they find 2 skeletons in a chest filled with gold coins and jewelry. The estimate value, when they start talking about how they got something. Here they talked about a parchment, which they ended up finding over there in Oak Island, by the way, a piece of parchment of some sort, and invisible ink in a fire burning on the hearth. The parchment proved to contain a cryptogram. Legrand deciphered and set in the directions finding the treasure buried by the infamous Captain Kidd. Who's Captain Kidd? So I talk about Prescott. It's probably around the same time. Let's see, what year was that? I think it's on something else. And there's also something, Cornelius Neil Dalton. All right. So I'm going to go back over here. Given the verbiage used in the text, members of this school also believe that the treasure has been buried by someone of British origin with a flair for the eccentric. To those who hold dearly to legends of pirates and their tie to buried gold, Captain Kidd seemed a likely candidate to construct the elaborate pit and create the mysterious stone. I mean, that's pretty much in what was in the story of Poe. With the stone out of their path, the men of the Onslow Company resumed the excavation and expecting to dig 10 more feet before hitting another timber structure. So, I mean, they went through this whole process, but that whole thing with, let's see, and we'll go back down here. Here again, Captain Kidd. Buried treasure of 17th century pirate named Captain Kidd. According to local legend, a dying sailor on a Kidd's crew claimed that there were £2 million worth of treasure was buried on the island. And the treasure hunters of the 19th century uncovered a large stone with a fabled money pit containing symbolic inscriptions said to read 40 feet below, £2 million lied buried. I mean, it's possible that money was there, taken, or whatever, but there's, also some other things going on here. And I think the primary point that I'm bringing this up is the connection between Edgar Allan Poe, the connection with Prescott's Waiting, the story that he gave me about Prescott, and whether or not Prescott is Captain Kidd. It seems to feel that way. especially when I saw the doubloons, and then I saw that, you know, there was different things going on. They also somewhere mentioned about Boston. So it all pretty much fit together, in my opinion. And also, I do talk about the Knights Templar. And not that other people haven't tied some of these different incidents together in a book, but I do find it quite interesting that this is like the focal point of many of the different things that I talked about. And it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. These guys picked up a few things, and I can respect that. So anyhow, that's the end of this part. And I just, you know, you can explore and look around, but remember that there's something about Edgar Allan Poe wanting to get his messages, leave his breadcrumbs or trail behind for people to look up and figure out some of the things that he knew, and maybe see, you know, beyond time and space, that he's speaking to us still, and see what's going on. So thank you for listening, and until we bring another chapter, I hope you enjoy this.